Good evening or good morning, folks. AEW Dynamite report for October the 5th, 2022. And I'm going to get this one out of the way off the top because it's really going to kind of be the dominant theme coming out of the show and also leading into potentially future shows and more AEW backstage drama because, of course, it seems to be always be AEW backstage drama now. So I'm going to take this one from Fightful. Credit to Fightful for this. So Andrade and Sammy Guevara were involved in a backstage altercation, presumably, and this comes on the heels of a bit of a social media back and forth earlier on in the day, which again leads into the whole idea of, regardless of what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to create a work or trying to manufacture something or trying to create some drama and some intrigue, I don't think AEW is in a position to be able to afford to play too many of these games. If you're going to do something in kayfabe, do something in kayfabe. If you've got an issue backstage, well, then start suspending and firing some people and really get this thing under control. Because again, as I've discussed already in previous videos, and I don't want to spend too much time on tonight, the look is never good because it looks like Tony Khan is ineffectual as a manager, ineffectual as an owner, doesn't seem to have control over anything that's going on, and people seem to be running off and doing whatever they want to do, which is never a good look. So from Fightful, it is happening again. Literally, that's a very ominous start to a report. Another backstage altercation took place in All Elite Wrestling. Sources familiar with the situation claimed that the October 5th Dynamite show, there was an altercation between Andrade and Sammy Guevara. The two had taken shots at each other in interviews and on social media throughout the week, and it came to a head at the Dynamite tapings. Andrade was removed from a scheduled Mass vs. Career match against Dark Order's 10, with the latter remaining on the Rampage schedule in another match. Those we spoke to say there was a verbal altercation that got physical, Sammy Guevara shoving Andrade and Andrade throwing a punch. We're not sure if the punch actually connected, but we're told it was not part of a grander work. At least one and possibly both wrestlers were removed from the tapings and sent home. Now, obviously I'm going to talk about the Dynamite show. Sammy Guevara was in the main event. Spoiler, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. So TMZ has confirmed this report. Andrade posted, "He respect me and I'll respect you" on social media shortly after. Earlier today, Fightful reported that several in AEW were frustrated by the situation in light of the locker room being more cohesive in recent weeks. And I'm going to second that. The reality is, right now, that locker room needs to at least show outwardly a united front. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of things that the WWE is doing very well that a lot of their stands are getting very excited about. Truthfully, as I said, product-wise, I really don't think the product has improved because it honestly couldn't have gotten much worse. But AEW needs to focus on its own house. It needs to focus on its own possibilities. And funny enough, again, this is where I say, even if it was a work, supposedly, it's still not a good idea because it takes away from what was otherwise a decent show. There were elements of it that were still a little bit questionable. There were elements of it that were still a little bit inconsistent, but I did see a few encouraging signs, and I'm going to get to them when I get into the review here in a moment. But the reality is that gets undercut. It gets undone. The CM Punk thing, people asked initially, the question was, oh, is this a work? But it undercut the MJF return, the potential storyline that you had going there. If the CM Punk injury was the excuse, that's fine. It doesn't change the fact that you undercut a potential MJF thing. Now, MJF, fortunately, is good enough to continue and regain his own momentum and reset himself, and right now MJF is doing fine. And CM Punk being out of the company right now is completely fine from all accounts, and realistically, it's not hurting the show in any way, shape, or form. It allows us to focus on other areas. And again, as I said, outside of this part that I'm talking about off the top, the show was decent, and there were a lot of elements that advanced forward that I'm still overall happy with. Again, some inconsistency, but on the whole, this was a positive show outside of the look and the perception that comes out of the way the main event plays out. And I'll get to that here in a couple of minutes. But let me get started on the show itself. We're going to start right off the top. At the very beginning of it is on the heels of that altercation. We start off with an MJF Wheeler Yuta match to start off the show. Solid in ring from both guys. Both guys are great. They've already worked with each other a bunch of times on the independents. MJF was in solid form, played up the crowd, was in full heel mode. The crowd was into Yuta, so you had a good dynamic with the crowd. Solid. I think the crowd wasn't too big given the venue itself, but it was an intimate venue and allowed for a short ramp, but also meant that the crowd was still very enthusiastic. So a good enthusiastic crowd will make up for a lot, and it still felt like a decent crowd given the enthusiasm the crowd was giving to this whole sequence. The crowd was into a full near-fall sequence. They really moved on. MJF won by a modified armbar, went a modified salt to the earth, so that was his way of winning. And afterwards, it looked like Wheeler Yuta was about to get attacked. It looked like MJF was going to attack him with the Dynamite Diamond ring, seemingly reluctantly, given, like I said, some of their background and history. And then William Regal comes out with brass knucks. They stare each other down, and then MJF goes off. And the Diamond ring was brought by Stokely Hathaway, and of course the Firm was there to reassert themselves as kind of the faction for hire, so to speak, to continue that piece of the storyline. So a decent start to the show, a good reaction by the crowd. Next, you got a Jericho Appreciation Society video package and promo. It sets up the ROH Championship match versus Bryan Danielson in Toronto. Sammy Guevara is booed by the crowd. Like I said, this will be a recurring thing because Sammy Guevara is on the show. And again, talking about what we talked about a moment ago, the Andrade match right now is off. So at the moment, Andrade seems to have been sent home. I don't know if he's suspended. Don't have any background on that yet. But the point is he was sent home, but Sammy Guevara is on the show being featured prominently. Not a good look, but we'll get to that more in the main event. Jay Lethal taking on Darby Allin. Next match. Fun match. Darby wins. Gets a reluctant handshake from Jay Lethal, who's kind of having that reluctant, kind of tweener role right now with that. And then after an extended sequence, so Sunday Dot. But it's one of those things where we'll see if it leads to something down the road. Darby Allin definitely needs something storyline-wise to kind of move him forward because right now it's just match after match, and that's kind of all he's doing. But it doesn't matter. He was on the match, and it was the anniversary show, so it was good that you were able to get another one of the pillars on the show. Next was Brian Cage taking on Wardlow. So my first comment here was great to see the TNT champion and great to see Brian Cage actually on the show. So Brian Cage is there representing the faction embassy from the Ring of Honor. So it's still kind of the problem that we're getting a lot of feature for Ring of Honor, but at the same time, Ring of Honor doesn't have a show. So in the end, Dynamite kind of gets shoehorned into being kind of a Ring of Honor show. But again, Brian Cage on the show, great. Against Wardlow, great. So we get the TNT champion defending the TNT title on the show. So that's kind of a win-win. And these two guys, a little bit of a Haas fight. I like it. So it was good for what it was, and it still managed to at least get them on the show, so that was great. After the match, Wardlow wins with the Powerbomb Symphony, and then he's attacked by the Embassy. Samoa Joe comes in to make the save. The numbers advantage is still with the Embassy, but then FTR comes in to make the save and evens the sides. Next up is the kind of stacking that they like to do a lot with the women's division that I'm not a huge fan of, but so there's a Britt Baker promo. So again, you stack them into a multi-part segment. Britt Baker says Saraya is not medically cleared, playing into that kind of side of an angle. And then that leads us immediately into a 6-woman match. Take it with Penelope Ford and Serena Deeb and Jamie Hayter with Britt Baker and Rebel taking on Willow Nightingale, Athena, and Toni Storm with Saraya. So we're playing into this kind of mini faction thing. So I'm glad the match was given decent amount of time, which is good. The crowd was really into a lot of this, different sections of it. There was a little bit of a botch in there that I'll talk about in a second. I won't spend too much time on it. But overall, solid match, good reaction. Right now, Jamie Hayter is super, super over. And you do have kind of a continuation of Britt Baker having kind of the War of Words with Saraya, and that plays into the conclusion of the match. But a good solid match overall. There was a multi-move sequence where a bunch of the ladies hit one big move after another, and then Penelope Ford was going to do her little Matrix move, and then into the cutter. She did the Matrix part, but I think lost her footing, and then the cutter ended up being kind of awkward. I think she did the cutter on Willow Nightingale. Willow Nightingale tried to sell it as best she could, but that cutter was not Penelope Ford's best. I don't mind that move in her arsenal, but you got to be clean on it. And I think that's one of those situations where maybe one of the coaches needs to say, like, look, if somebody trips or something, don't just try to make the move because it'll look like you basically have to fall over in order to make that move work, and it looks terrible. So that's just kind of my opinion on a minor thing overall. Overall, the match was fine. Post-match, Baker got in the face of Saraya. They started exchanging punches. Everybody starts fighting. Baker is thrown to the outside, and then Saraya super kicks Rebel while she's on her knees, basically begging to end the segment with her theme playing. It's a continuation. At least it kind of keeps things going. There's a little bit of a Britt Baker Saraya thing, these women. But I really do want to separate off these women into their own feuds or whatever. And Jamie Hayter, everybody's kind of, the crowds are reacting to Jamie Hayter great. So it's one of those things, at some point you have to do something with them that isn't just lumping them together into a homogenous whole where like, okay, we're going to get these 6 women in a match. The match was solid. It was decent for what it was. But right now it's the only women's match on the card. Although I did see one encouraging sign, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes here. I'm happy about that. So I'll get to that in a minute. Then we get to a backstage interview with Roosh and Private Party. Basically, they're getting a tongue lashing for not being there for Roosh and being his backup quickly enough, even though they're part of the organization. And they do get a bit of a line in about contract tampering, which I thought was very funny. It played out kind of well. I did like it. It was a bit of a cute line, but they managed to throw that in there, which is fine. But Andrade's not there because of what we just talked about at the beginning of the show here. But it's unfortunate, and it kind of stood out like a sore thumb. But Roosh was there, and then Jose was there, kind of to take up that role and to kind of give them their tongue lashing and play into that piece. Next up was the kind of WWE-ish, Attitude Era-ish segment, National Scissoring Day. The crowd was very much into it, and I put my note here. I'm shaking my head that I have to explain this segment, and I really am. But it's exactly what it sounds like. They made 1 million double entendres to scissoring. A lot of comments about scissoring. And at one point, Billy Gunn looks like he's going to give him the key to the city, but gives him a gigantic pair of scissors that I think is used to cut ribbons. And then Anthony Bowens runs around with scissors, and they say, don't run with scissors. And it's a lot of jokes that would fit in Attitude Era kind of thing. The crowd was into it. The point is the crowd was into it. It was fine. Not my cup of tea at this stage in the game, but I understood. And it was fine for them. What I will say as well, and a note that I made here, Anthony Bowens got a great opportunity to showcase his promo. He got to actually have a lot of mic time. So look, once in a while, I don't mind a segment like this because it allowed the Acclaim to have plenty of time to cut a promo, interact with the crowd, do a lot of little physical comedy, a lot of double entendre, little silly jokes. And it fits with kind of their character. Billy Gunn played into this. He's having a good time enjoying himself. So overall, I'm not going to complain about the segment. It's not for me at this stage, but it fit well into what they were trying to do, and it led into the interruption after they got a good amount of time to set everything up. A good interruption by Swerve Strickland, who came in and kind of like, downplayed the whole thing, oh, this is embarrassing, the whole bit. But it set up him talking about and challenging basically Billy Gunn to a one-on-one match because Billy Gunn had interfered in the previous match. So it set up a one-on-one match in Toronto. So now we're starting to fill in the Toronto card. I mentioned that I wanted to see what they were actually going to do with the Toronto thing. So I guess we're going to get Swerve Strickland and Billy Gunn in a one-on-one match in 2022 in Toronto, which is an interesting choice, question mark, but fine. Look, I can live with it. It's going to be interesting to see Billy Gunn wrestle after all this time, in Toronto. It's going to be kind of interesting. It's been a long time since I watched the matches, and I don't think the last time I was watching Billy Gunn was still in WWE wrestling regularly, so it's going to be interesting to see that. But Billy Gunn is in tremendous shape. I'll say that for sure. And obviously he had a lot of fun with the segment. They played it up. Then Smart Mark Sterling comes out, tries to get the Acclaim to join him, gets beat up, a little bit more of a comedy segment, and then it kind of closes off the segment like that. And they did do a rock, paper, scissors joke as well towards the tail end of that. We cut into a promo for Friday night talking about the Dark Order against Death Triangle. Solid setup. It'll be a fun match for sure. Backstage promo with Madison Rayne and Sky Blue. And they was interrupted by Anna Jay and Tay Mello. So this is where I said, I found this to be an encouraging sign because my critique a few minutes ago was that they stack these women's segments. If there's a promo, they'll do the promo and then the match, and that'll be the end of the women on the show, period, before or after. And that's it. They just find this one slot to throw everything in there, shoehorn it all together. But in this case, they actually had another promo segment with the women, which is great, and it set up a match. So it was Madison Rayne and Sky Blue interrupted, like I said, by Anna Jay and Tay Mello. And there was a little bit of a good back and forth quickly. It didn't take too long on this. It was a good clapback, though, from Sky Blue because Anna Jay and Mello were talking about charisma and how right after the comment about her being a good wrestler from Madison Rayne, is that, they're doing the whole sports entertainer thing and they saying, oh, she needs a sports entertainer coach to get charisma and, the rest of it. And then Sky Blue claps back and says, well, she could spend some more time learning about charisma and they could spend some more time working on their wrestling, which was a good shot. I like that little clapback. It's set up for a tag team match on the Friday, which is fine. And they're going to do like a doubleheader with Rampage and then a Battle of the Belts, which is going to run late, which is, I don't know. Anyway, it's part of the anniversary week with Dynamite and then obviously Rampage. Anyway, it was fine. I'm glad they were able to get a backstage promo, and I'm glad it meant that they actually got a different segment outside of the normal little block that they normally shoehorn and squeeze together. So next, you have Roosh versus Hangman Page. So in terms of in-ring, there's lots of good stuff here. Good, solid, hard-hitting match. Hangman wins by a buckshot lariat. Like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time on the individual moves, but both guys are great in ring. So go back and check out the match if you want to. Andrade's absence is still unfortunate. That's kind of a note for me still. Private Party comes out after the match. Presumably looks like they're going to do something against Hangman. But then Mox comes out and they back off as a result of that. And then he cuts a promo and the guys kind of stare back and forth. It looks like Hangman is going to coax him into a match. He cuts a line that is almost like a little shot at Sammy Guevara, but again, it rings hollow given the main event, and I'll talk about that again in a minute. Now, here's, like I said, this is an encouraging sign for me. So we did this, and now we got a backstage promo with Willow Nightingale. So here's another backstage promo with the ladies, setting up something else. The point is, my key here is, it's not just having promos for the sake of having promos or segments for the sake of having segments. Right now you have this kind of main event program going on where Toni Storm unfortunately has been lumped into it, but at least she's getting to do something prominent. She's having these matches. You got these women here, and you've got Britt Baker and you've got Saraya having kind of their own little feud thing going on, but it's all tied together right now. But in this instance, you've got Willow Nightingale having her own backstage promo, which sets up to something I'll talk about in a second. And you had Jade and Madison Rayne setting up their own thing with Anna Jay and Tay Mello, who had almost been forgotten in the women's division. So look, if you're going to give me a match or a little mini feud with them, and you're going to have the main one going on, and now we got the Willow Nightingale thing, which was amazing for me, which I'll talk about now. And the reason it was amazing for me was not because of what Willow Nightingale said, because in reality, she said she was on a roll. And I kind of started laughing because she did win the match, and I believe I mentioned that. She did win the match, the 6-woman tag, but She had previously lost the match, the one-on-one match prior to that on Rampage against Jamie Hayter. So she's literally not on a roll. She had literally won one match. She had got one pinfall. But anyway, so like, fine, it still counts. But anyway, the point is, she used this on a roll thing to be the excuse for saying that she wanted to challenge for the TBS championship, which brought out, in that backstage segment, Jade and the Baddies come out. Okay, so they're on the show. The TBS Women's Champion is actually on the show, even if it's just for a moment in a backstage segment. This is good. So presumably they set up a match now where they're going to compete for the TBS Championship. Great. But the point is, now what we've done, we've got a main segment, we've got a tag team match with the women, and we've got this TBS Championship match, presumably with Willow Nightingale and Jade at some indeterminate time. I don't know if they specifically dictated where that's going to be. But the point is, at least it's something. And at least the TBS Champion and the TNT Champion and the AEW Champion and the AEW Women's Champion, technically, were actually on the show. All on the same show at the same time. In different capacities. Mox did a promo, this backstage segment, Wardlow was in a match, but at least everybody got on the show. All the main AEW belts were represented in some way on the show, either backstage or in a match directly, or indirectly. So next, Luchasaurus taking on Fuego del Sol. My note was, Luchasaurus kills him. Then, Jungle Boy attacks him mid-post match with a chair before he's about to throw Fuego del Sol, and then he says he wants to break him, and then Christian grabs the microphone. He says he wants to break him, and also says that he'll take him on anytime, any place, which leads to Christian grabbing the microphone and saying, we're not going to do it here in Washington, D.C., we're going to do it in my hometown, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, next week. So that's going to be part of that Toronto show. We're going to get Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus in Toronto, so fine, fair enough, sounds good. And then, after this ends, we'll go to the main event, which is going to be Chris Jericho and Sammy Guevara taking on Daniel Garcia and Bryan Danielson. I already talked about it a couple times throughout this review. I think it's a bad look that Sammy Guevara was effectively rewarded by having a prominent role in the show from kind of beginning to end, and now he's in the main event segment, and it actually gets worse here in a minute. We'll talk about it. So unfortunately, unfortunately he's being rewarded, so to speak, by having this high-profile spot. You know, Andrade was kind of removed from the show, but then he was going to have a mask versus career match, I believe, with 10, but now they've kind of had to rework that whole thing. But Sammy Guevara still gets to be included in this. So basically, they have a tag team match, good solid match. Daniel Garcia was doing some good work. Bryan Danielson was doing some good work. Chris Jericho was doing good work. Sammy Guevara, as always, in ring, is great. But the crowd was obviously very much against him because they kind of knew a little bit about what was going on, so it was a smart crowd. But at the same time, Sammy Guevara was able to get some great offense. They did a lot of back and forth, a lot of great spots, a lot of it. But in the end, Sammy Guevara gets the pin on Daniel Garcia, which is a terrible look and a terrible selling point. The heels get to go off celebrating. Obviously, that's going to lead, and now we're going to roll into Toronto, where you're going to have Chris Jericho taking on Bryan Danielson for the ROH Championship in Toronto. That'll be part of that show. But the point is, we got to reward Sammy Guevara for what, effectively, based on that Fightful report, seems to be a bit of a war of words that escalated that he helped precipitate. And once again, Sammy Guevara is involved in another kind of unprofessional exchange with one of his coworkers, and he's being rewarded kind of again. And this is not a good look. And like I'll say overall, not a great thing. And my last note here was not a good visual for the crowd at home, given the circumstances. Might have been smarter to let Chris Jericho get the pin or the submission or something, so that at least you're not rewarding Sammy Guevara by giving him that last but the win in this case, coming out of what's going to be another controversial run here. And this is not a good look. And this is Tony Khan again. Work or shoot, whatever you want. You're demonstrating you don't seem to have an ability to control your own roster. And in effect, you're rewarding bad behavior here. And I'm not a big fan of it. Now, maybe I'll talk about that some more in a separate video. Bottom line, overall, the show was decent. I liked the show. I thought it was solid overall. I'm not going to go all the way up because there were some inconsistent spots here and there. But I'm going to give it a B-. I think it was a good, solid show coming out of it. I think the in-ring wrestling on the whole was very good. I was super pleased to see a little bit of continuation. Again, and I'm going to keep harping on it until it improves because it's been a weakness of the show for balance and to get this potential. I'm thrilled that the women had multiple segments, even if it's like backstage promos sprinkled throughout the show here and there, just to separate them out a little bit and give them multiple things to do. I was also thrilled, separate from all that most, if not all, the AEW championships were featured or shown on the screen, or one of the champions at least got to say something. There was something related to the AEW championships on the screen. I got to see the TBS and the TNT champions. I got to see the AEW men, the AEW women's champions, and I got to see the tag team champions, and I got to see, a variety of other titles on there. But the point is, the AEW titles were showcased on the whole during the course of this broadcast. And that's a good thing. But again, the main event was an ROH thing, again, Chris Jericho's doing some amazing work, but having Sammy Guevara kind of have the pin to end the show and celebrating with the heels, not the best look for me. But overall, the show will give it a B minus. Good, solid show. I'm hoping that this should lead to some good momentum in Toronto. I think the Toronto should be pretty good. I'll be there for that one, so I'm excited to check that out, and that's going to be fun. And I'll see how the rest of this card winds up and how it fills out. So we'll hopefully, crossing our fingers, that it's going to be good. That's all. That all said, that's my review for this week, October 5th, 2022, AEW Dynamite. Curious what your thoughts are about that. Feel free to throw that in the comment section. More videos coming up on the channel as we go along. And for the next week's presentation, I'll see if I can record it when I get back. It'll depend on kind of what time I get back from the show. Regardless, that's it from me. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more upcoming. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.